This is our third workshop of our Small Farms Big Changes project with funding support from New South Wales Government Environmental Trust. Today we've enlisted the help of Dave Forrest. Dave is an ex-agricultural teacher for TAFE New South Wales. He's an organic grower and he is an excellent person to quiz about these sorts of things. So I'm excited to learn a little bit about what he has to say. We couldn't have picked a better spot to discuss this topic because here at Farm & Co they've done a really good job of diversifying their farm, and they're always trialling new things to improve the way they produce their produce, and they're always keen to share that information with others. So I'm excited to see what Michelle's been up to and to see what's on the horizon.
So we've been here about 18 going on 19 years now, and yeah, we've got 52 acres here and we just farm the top part. We've got orchards down the centre of the paddocks, and cows down the bottom.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I was mentioning earlier that you've diversified the farm a fair bit. Could you talk us a little bit about what you've got going on here? There's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on. When we first started on the farm, we realised that we didn't have a lot of market power doing sweet potato like everybody else, so we started diversifying into tomatoes and capsicums and zucchinis and still selling outside of the farm. And then we realised that that still wasn't making ends meet, so then we decided that we would get into selling directly to local marketers, and that had its limitations as well. So then we went to a farm stall, and we basically started with a tent or a roadside stall until all the produce went missing, and then we thought, right, we'll just man it and then just greet our customers. So that sort of worked out that way.
Yeah. And it's progressed from there.
Yes. So then we decided to put animals into the mix. So we got chickens. We only started off with about 30 chickens to start off with. Now we've got 200 and we'll keep on increasing that. We've got pigs in the system as well, and the pigs were sort of a serendipitous moment for somebody saving a pig, and his name's Hank, not Ham. So he then got a mate who's not, they won't mate, but he's got a female with him to keep him company, and they help us within our system, and yeah, just to make it all a bit more sustainable.
Yeah, fantastic.
And then we got the cafe. And then we got Farm & Cozy, which is an Airbnb. So yeah, we've got our fingers in a few pies just to keep everything level.
Yeah, and you've got a distribution network as well, where you're sending the produce off farm as well.
Yeah, oh, we do. My son's actually taken that over now, so that's not part of our business strictly. That's his now. So that's called the Farm Folk. There's a good plug for you, George. And yeah, he got very interested in, making sure that his future was looked after, because he's only 24. So yeah.
Yeah.
So he started a box delivery system. So he does it from Brisbane down to the Gold Coast.
Oh wow! All the way up there,
yes.
Far out. Yeah, but that's something we always see with guys like Joel Salatin about diversifying and giving part of the business, or encouraging family members to make their own business.
Yes.
And value add to the farm.
Yes.
I think that's fantastic to see. And, George loving it as well, which is great.
Yeah.
You've trialled a few different things here over the years. What's some of the more recent ones you've got going on?
So we're always looking to improve our soil management and weed management. So we've always had chicken tractors here, but they've never worked for us as I have liked, and now we've got this little model going where we've got a tractor and a tunnel within the crop itself, so that sort of works out a lot better for us. And we just move the tunnel from row to row, so they clean up the bugs, and they clean up in between the crop, and so it's quite good actually.
Yeah.
Eat the spent fruit or vegetables, and yeah.
I was out here a couple of weekends ago having a lovely feed, and went for a wander and saw them in operation.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, they were great. I was going to ask you, how do they move around? Are they fairly easy to move around?
Yeah, they are fairly easy to move around. It does take a little bit of time, but it's not that much time. When you see the benefits of it, it's actually not too bad because it all disconnects, so they're in sections. So
it's not too heavy work. You just lift up a section and off you go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nice. I'm trying to think what else we had to chat about. You talked a little bit earlier about creating a bit of a circular economy.
Yes.
Did you want to sort of touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, actually, I think when I first started, we started as conventional farmers, and then I did an organics course with Dave Forrest, which was just the most beneficial thing I've ever done. And just even the sense of what a farm should look like, because it's always been in my mind that you have everything neat and tidy, and it's not necessarily the case with organics. And so you have to grow with organics, and when people talk about an organic process, I just went from conventional to organics, and we got ourselves into a bit of strife. We lost a lot of fruit to start off with, but it's actually the best thing that we ever did, because unless you do it that way, you don't actually ever get on top of it, I think. So then we changed our whole management of farming. So we used to do, on this scale, what I call broad acre, but not broad acre, because we had monocultures. So we'd have the whole farm in one crop. So then we went to a few different crops, and then we started looking at market garden style production, and it actually has worked so much better for us. And even the whole sense of water and fertilising, just everything has changed so much for us now. So we've tightened up our space, because we always use tractors to do everything, but we only use tractors now just to till a paddock just as we need it. So we're not doing the whole paddock, whereas before we used to do the whole paddock and we used to cover it all in manure. And now what we do is we've tightened up our spacing, tightened up our seedling spacing as well, and our rows in between are much, much smaller, and they take a small walk behind tiller now, so it's just to scuffle it up, but then the chickens are helping us with that. Also, we've added the pigs into that equation, where we move the pigs around and just put an electric fence around a spent crop, and then put the pigs in, and I call them the rotor pigs, and so they help with manuring and digging it up and folding it in. So that's a really good system for us as well. Plus we've got things like adding sunflowers into the mix, which gives a good ligneous sort of crop, but we always add other crops in with that, as you can see behind us and behind here. It's not just sunflowers. Sometimes we put all sunflowers, and that's helped us in the bee population. So then we added hives onto our place. So we've got hives down at our home, and plus it's nice for the public to have a look at. And then when we added the cafe into it, we wanted to show how the system actually works with taking crops out of the paddock to do simple plant-based menu. So we have no meat on our menu, and just to let people understand that it's actually really easy to create a dish simply and deliciously, and just with our plant-based menu. So that was really nice. And then from there, the compost goes back to the chickens, to the pigs. We now collect the manure. So we haven't actually bought any outside fertilisers in for probably 2 months now. We're just trialling that, and I just realised we may need to get more chickens to keep that production up. So, but we only have to use a small amount of that, and not as much as we used to use in the commercial product. And then the food is grown and back into the kitchen again. So we've got this nice closed loop happening. So, and just everything just seems to be working really nicely.
Yeah, nice. I was going to ask how you transitioned through the drought. Were you were you bare fallow? Did you have anything on the ground during that?
Yeah,
that
we did actually. In fact, we had the best tomato season we've ever had, which is really interesting. So we had enough water just to water our crops. We had most of our paddocks already seeded with sunflowers, so they were already established, not as high as they were because of the drought, and everything was covered by maybe one paddock. So we were really fortunate because when I look back on the beginning of that rain, we had just planted out all of our seedlings for that week, and we got the biggest deluge ever, and we lost no soil in that area.
Yeah,
we probably lost a few seedlings just because of the waterlogging, but the place that I did lose soil was on my driveway. So my driveway's got the ruts, but everything else held. And when I look back, I think it was probably 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it was a bit longer than that. I had a drone put up and I had wash all through this farm, and I had no wash this time, not one bit of wash. So everything held, and it is amazing really that we've come this far.
So you got the cover crops in early,
yes,
and they made it through.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
and we always have cover crops in now. Like we try not like this. There's a paddock behind us here that Aidan's standing next to, and which is bare, but that's just been planted. So we only strip plant now. We only strip rotary hoe now as well. Yeah. Only what we need to do.
How deep are you disturbing the soil? Just the top?
Just the top.
Yeah.
So, so we've come probably a much longer way than I probably realised, and actually as I talk about it, I think we probably have actually done better than I realise sometimes.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Michelle.
Thank you,
great
Aidan.
to get a bit of a background on what's been happening, and probably more things on the future, no doubt.
Yes, and hopefully we'll be doing some, education programs for kids now, and getting into health and wellness programs. We just started yoga with the staff, so that we're trialling that and seeing how that goes, and so there's a few more things on the horizon which will be really nice. But also thank you to you as the Sustainable Ag Department in the Council, because I think people don't realise that without your support some of this doesn't happen. Like our chicken tractors probably wouldn't have happened at that time, and some of the composting programs that we've had, and that's all been really beneficial, and just days like today was really, really good, so thank you.
No worries, I'm happy to help. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, great.
All right, thanks, Michelle. Well, thanks for coming along today, Dave. Just wanted to get sort of straight into it. What are some of the biggest issues that the vegetable farmers are having in the Tweed? What are some of the biggest issues that they're having in their soil?
I think the Tweed's similar to most vegetable production areas. The pressure of production has increased the pressure on soil and pushed the capacity of the critical fertility functions to the limit. So the soils are getting harder, so they're lower in organic matter, and they're losing the ability to accept, hold and drain water. They're also losing the ability to recycle mineral nutrients into the crops. And these things combined with changing weather conditions, with longer droughts and quicker flips into wet seasons, soil quality is really being compromised to try and maintain production. So the farmers are caught in a bind everywhere really, including the Tweed.
Yeah, okay. And in a broad sense, because we'll probably get into some of the details later on, what do you think are some of the top solutions to some of these issues?
The solutions are really in the farming system. So there needs to be a farming system which incorporates ability for the soil to recover. And this is the challenge. We understand the mechanisms of soil quite well. So how do you put it into practice? We've really got to look at rotations, diversity in crops, and changing fertiliser regimes, and also moving away from broad spectrum pesticides, which are interfering with the biology in the soil.
Yeah, okay. And is Michelle's farm any different to any other farm in the Tweed? Is she doing better, or what are some of the issues that she's having as well?
It is historically a conventional farm, and so that legacy lasts quite a while. We see that in the soil structure, we see that in the nutrient content in the soil, the carbon levels in the soil. So there are problems in common with other farmers, but there are some small changes gradually being made here, and I think they can be ramped up as we get a greater understanding of what's going on. So the important thing is to understand what's there, and then understand the techniques and practices and inputs which can actually influence us in the right direction while maintaining productivity.
Have you got any good recommendations for resources for people to go to learn a bit more about this, or what would you say are your top 3 books that you found?
One that's been very influential for many farmers looking to change in this region is actually from overseas, but the concepts are the same, so it's a matter of adapting it, and that's The Biological Farmer by Gary Zimmer. Another would be Soil as Ecosystem, Jerry Brunetti. Farmer's Ecosystem by Jerry Brunetti. And both of those look in different ways at how we can actually encompass change, as well as the tools for that change. So they've been very valuable books for people. We've also had for over the decades a long-term Tweed Richmond Organic Producers Organisation, and that's been instrumental, working with DPI over the years to help them understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do with soils. And more recently, only about 15 years ago, we started up a group called Soil Care. Both those groups are land care groups. So the idea is that farmers are the major land managers, and we really have to support one another to develop systems which actually care for the land. So there's a lot of information that's come and is still available through both those groups. Just look up the wsoilcare.org and you'll find information from our 3 conferences, plus podcasts, and useful information that comes up every month.
If you were to try and give us a top 5 of your take-home messages for the things that you could do on your farm to improve soil biology and increase soil carbon, what would you sort of put as those top 5?
Well, the top 5 is the fact that the soil is an ecosystem and it needs holistic management. So those things are you need a complete soil mineral audit, so you know what's available and what's not in the soil, what's there, which things to improve, which in their levels, and which things to decrease. In doing that, the buffering capacity of soil carbon in all functions is something which needs to be focused on. So we'll look at our farming system. The easiest and cheapest place to get carbon from is to let plants catch it for us. So we need time in our farming system to be able to use plants to trap that. So we need the bulky crops with deep root systems, because it's only between that root system, biology, particularly mycorrhizae, which will actually redevelop soil structure. And soil structure and air in the soil is a basic functioning. If we don't get that right, we're tinkering around the edges. So we also need to look at the types of minerals that we use. to make sure that we're getting soil improvement. So there's minerals that the biology of the soil is incapacitated if we're short in certain minerals, and all our soils are now short in those minerals. So we really need to look at that soil audit, get those right, work on the soil structure, get plants in the ground and growing, utilise sunlight, and we've got augmentation through recycling organic matter through composting, for instance, and we need a cycle where what goes off the farm actually comes back onto the farm. And compost is one of the keys to that.
Yeah.
It's very important. So we can look at those minerals, we look at how we're actually rotating and growing the crops, creating diversity, and those things all come together with an improved soil and better resilience.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, mate. Well, I don't want to take you away from everyone else here that's come along, so we might get into it.
All right, I thought
Thanks, mate.
let's go. I told you about the soil health card. We developed it with farmers. We didn't want to spend money on stuff, so we wanted stuff that was easy to get to put it together. We went through DPI and CSIRO with the farmers, validating the tests. So they look very rustic, but they actually do the job. We used to have a coat hanger to do this job. So normally, say you're random with what you're doing and you repeat this test, not just in one spot, but in 5 spots each time. If you go to the Soil Care website, it's a free download with all the information about the equipment and how to do it and the score sheets. What we've got a way of rating whether we're poor, good, or getting there. No signs of earthworms in there, so
Give it a little mix.
yeah. Magic hands. Michelle's got one in her pocket. Yeah, so naturally well structured and sort of being built up, but without the help of earthworms. So yeah, good little critter. That's good. But I'd definitely make a call on that we're vacant. We've got a vacancy sign up there, earthworms wanted. So that's where I say we've got to, why aren't they here? They need the...
That they're still there, they're just not in that spot?
That's why we do 5.
Okay, 5 spots.
Yeah, that's why we do 5, because it could be atypical. And that's why we do it on an ongoing basis. So, well, there wasn't there before, might have been the wrong season, and now there is. But this is the season for earthworms, so they like the moist soil and they do build up and normally get more now than in the dry season. So that would be an area to work on, and that's where in the non-cropping phase we've got a good resting period which they can be very comfortable when they're here. So we can actually have a plot somewhere that they build up in. So even if you've got some in the garden beds but not here. I had that, went to an orchard one time and nothing in the orchard, stone fruit orchard. We went into, and they said, oh, well, you know, it's the wrong season, it's too cold, etc. But we went to their garden beds and they were full of them to check. So we can check on the boundaries and say, well, there's none here, but is there any over there, you know, where we get them? So we can do it like a backup check on ourselves. So yeah, I definitely think that there'd be an intensive breeding program, but only in conjunction with increasing the things they need, the calcium and the phosphorus and organic matter, getting them started out here so that they can build up in the non-crop phase. So when we do a little bit of beating up in the cropping phase, they've got a foothold or a, whatever you call it with a worm. And, on the side, but their worm cast is a strongest structured soil particle that you can have, and that's because they're a biological digestion. So they're a cross between a chook and a cow in terms of their digestion. They have no teeth. They have a gizzard like a chook. And it's a microbial breakdown like in the rumen of a cow. They can't, it's not a chemistry, it's a microbial breakdown. And so that soil and minerals and organic matter get combined together and put out as cast. And cast is excellent material. So, which is why we want more and more of it happening. Much better to have them all through here than laboriously making a worm farm, etc. But the worm farm can help support the plants that we have out here when the worms aren't here, and do those jobs for us. We've got to build the structure back into that soil somehow. So the action of plant roots and macrobes and microbes are the only way to do it. It doesn't happen by itself. In fact, once there's no vegetation, the wetting and drying pattern of the soil actually degrades soil structure.
What about a deep root?
So everyone heard of P.A. Yeoman's Water for Every Farm? So that was his idea. But he just started shallow, so just no more than 50 mils below where the roots are getting to today. And he'd go along, add legume and calcium and phosphorus, use the plants then to put their roots down that deep a bit. And then next time you come around, try and deepen it a bit further, rather than all at once. If you do it all at once, you get a deeper temporary change, but more temporary. If you do it slowly, it's more permanent change because you've actually got the components that maintain that soil fertility in place, the roots and the microbes and the air. What would be better for the farming system would be not to have grass here. So grass hard to beat, and that's where the vining legumes like lablab come in and make the hard job easy. And you get more nutrient cycling, better soil improvement factors, all of those sorts of things. So there's sort of ideal to do that. And I mean, it's got smatterings of broadleafs through here with the buckwheat and those things, which is good. It's good for beneficials and those sorts of things. But we do want to look at the overall soil improvement plan. And the grasses have got benefits, but not everything. So yeah, those green manures and the clovers are quite good if you've got a smaller space, and they're certainly good in the outer lawn area. But the legumes tend to be indicators of calcium and phosphorus levels in the soil. So we're talking about if you've got lots of grass and no legumes in there, it's an immediate indicator you haven't got the things that the legumes like to accumulate. So you'll be short on them. The grass doesn't really need it. It actually ties up calcium in itself, doesn't really use it much.
How would you add calcium? Sorry, straightforward.
No, that's fine. You know, calcium is typically via a sedimentary rock like lime.
Okay.
And so, but there's also some in the basaltic rock is in there, but it's more tightly bound than the lime. The main thing with them is that once you get enough in the soil, you don't need any more. So a farm that I worked with over at Alstonville had all the usual conventional problems: no earthworms, low nutrient, poor biology, etc., etc. And you just used that low rate of lime, but in conjunction with legumes. The calcium level went up, and for 25 years there's been no need for any more lime. What's coming in just through the compost, etc., is at least equal to what's going out in the avocados. So the levels are there and they've stayed there. There's been no lime requirement for 2.5 decades and doesn't look like anything's going to be required there at all. It depends what you're looking to get out of it. So if you just want it for short term, then you cut it when you're ready. You can just cut it at the base and let it all die as a mulch, depending on what you need. Or Nadine's partner had a setup where you grow seasonally the vegetables, so you'd have lablab in all of the beds. And you go and you pull out the lablab and put it onto the next bed, and that one would be all wormy and ready to go. You just scratch it up and it's plant. No cultivation required, just a little bit of scratching on the top to form the bed up again, and plant. And then the next one you roll it over, and as he's rolling it over it's all breaking down into the next bed. So you work through the season, go through the beds and then start again. So it was very effective as a rotational veggie system.
And then you can let it go.
And he could leave it, if he didn't want to plant it all, he could just leave it there till next time. Or he could use it all on the side and then replant in spring.
Beds before he did it?
So they're into veggies, and when the veggies are finishing in spring, like his beetroot, you just go along and make a start and you put them a pace apart because it was easy. And as the bed was emptied out of veg, the lablab gradually grows up, and then the bed's finished, and so it just takes over.
So something like this, would you broadcast it after you've harvested?
No, it needs to go seed-soil contact in the ground because it's quite a big seed.
Okay.
So there's some other ones you can broadcast, but with a big seed like that, it needs to go in the ground. So plant it in the ground, but you need minimal, so you could just do one single rip line every 2.5 to 3 metres, and it will take up all that space eventually by itself. So you don't necessarily have to work up the whole block. Yeah, into a rip line or go along, and it will go from a grass bed to a lablab bed on the side. So you can actually do that, and it will normally it'll be a winner on that.
Is there any scope for a smaller garden bed to incorporate that style of? So in other words, you get into the end of your summer crop, start planting a bit of lablab, harvest, let it sit there. What's the duration it would need to be there before you'd want to turn that in to get your winter crops going? Or is that too short a duration?
And generally, to get value out of the plants growing, it needs about 12 weeks
12 weeks.
as a minimum. So it gets through that seedling stage and into a bit of maturity, so it's a bit more lignified in the material, and that will give you more fungal food. So if you do it when it's young and green all the time, it's all bacterial food, and so it hasn't got that plant protection and soil building property. But I would use something a bit easier to handle if you're in cramped quarters. Lablab likes a bit of room to stretch.
Okay.
So I'd go to something like vetch or peas,
Okay.
which will are weak climbers, and they're determinate. They don't get overly, don't go crazy. Or some of, excuse me, I mentioned earlier, the soybeans are quite good as a legume, and they don't vine either.
Okay.
So there's a number of ones, and a range of species once you look at it that you can diversify into.
Is vetch a summer crop or?
Vetch is autumn, winter, spring normally, and lupins would be at that time, and then the soybeans would be spring, summer to autumn, for instance.
We should do vetch now.
So now it's coming into that autumn, winter, spring time, so perfect for vetches and lupins and their companion cereals on the side. And The buckwheat's quite good, it comes up quite densely as a patch pretty quickly and is very good. It has root exudates which solubilize phosphorus. So it's actually got another mechanism of making that unavailable available. And it comes into its vegetation and then back into the soil. The smaller ones, the less vining, are more compatible. So oats, vetch, brassicas, buckwheat, all of those things can go in, and so there's four plant families. With the tomatoes, for instance, we could do a whole underplanting of something like rocket. So we'd have ground cover, roots in the ground. We'd take whatever rocket we need to use, and the rest of it will then go to flower, and it'll be good for beneficials, which the tomatoes are something which is a magnet for some of the pests, so you've got a magnet for some of the beneficials there as well. Provides that ground cover, as I said, and roots in the ground, and no competition at all to the tomatoes. So it'd be like using it as a living mulch, not necessarily going to get a full harvest out of it, but get whatever you want. You can do a lot of those little quick things like rocket and coriander are quite suitable to use for a multi-planting ground cover operation. Yeah, the things that are slower to take off, or you're going to direct these up a trellis or something, I guess. So there's a lot of space between them.
The other thing is, Dave, we have trialled millet in the interrow, but it got a little bit messy, got too hard to handle, it got into the crops, it just didn't quite work for us. I was looking at Kay's sorghum across the road, and I thought, wouldn't that be a nice thing just to chop and lay down? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I've used grain sorghum rather than forage sorghums to do that, because they're smaller and they finish their cycle, not bred to continuously grow. And I've had good success in establishment, and particularly going out of their season, because you don't want to favour them too much and then get regrowth and those sorts of things. So I've had quite a good result with everything from soybeans, wheat. You sort of sow them out of their season so they grow and then die, and the other crop carries on because it's in its time. So you be a little bit counterintuitive, grow it when it's not favoured, so you get what you need out of it without it being overpowering for your crop. He got in on the edges, he had kikuyu that was running in, and he did lablab on the edges, and when it had come towards the crop, you just throw it back again on the other way, and so he never had all the grass problems on the edge, and it sort of kept it clear. He's a very innovative guy.
Because the plants are really hungry for calcium, or?
No, it's tended from the parent material. It had reasonable levels, but it was heavily leached, so the levels in the soil, even in rainforest, are not as high as in the alluvial soils or the most fertile soils around the world, just because Australia is such an old weathered country. So we're low to start with, and then our farming system leaks calcium out of it. So we all started with dairy farms around here. So for 60 to 100 years, they're sending out milk. What's milk good for? Calcium levels. Sending out cattle. What's the bones made of? So it's been export out and not replacing. They got told to use ammonium sulfate fertilisers, so soluble nitrogen. And so when nitrogen leaches, it doesn't just leach as straight nitrate, it leaches as calcium nitrate. potassium nitrate, magnesium nitrate. So the levels under the farming system don't get improved. You know, a lot of farmers using a lot of nitrogen, and every time the soil test says use more nitrogen. Where's it, you know, where's it gone? And it's gone and it's leached out these other minerals which they're low in as well. So it's a function of the system. So we're not actually getting it and retaining it. And so I was describing other farms where actually you're trapping it in the plants and adding it with organic matter, and it's building up and it's at a good level. So it's 6 months abundant mineral in the Earth's crust, and everything's evolved to live with it on the side. So if we don't have it, we're short. We've evolved to live with it. So and it's got a particular molecular structure which allows it to cause these functions in soil, like aggregating soil particles, just because of the way the size of the molecule and its charge structure on the outside of it. So I mean, nature had it all worked out by itself, but when we look at it, we can say, well, this is actually why it's happening, and why we've got to allow it to happen. So we need to kick the system off and get it to a point where it's regenerated and becomes more sustainable, more stable. We can use the soil health card to monitor that change.
On farm, rather than bringing it in. Do you bring compost in onto your farm?
I do now, more than in the past, because it's become more available. And it is, as you say, a matter of how much feedstock have you got. And so I've been using more and more because of its value adding, but not able to make more and more. So I still make little bits, but getting more in. So here, if you need to be able to make it, one of the ones that have been working with some macadamia farmers is you use a relatively fast-growing windbreak like a wattle or eucalypts, but you chip them down. With wattles, you can go in with not much more than 2 to 3 years. You've got a cubic metre in one plant, and it doesn't need anything added to it. It's got all the lignified material. It's got some cellulose in the stems, and it's got the leaves, and it's got the nitrogen. So it can be a standalone. And so you take it through it, but you've got to be able to chip it up and make a minimum of a cubic metre.
What size chipper do you need?
When you go in early, so you can limit it to a 12-inch or 30 centimetres. That seems to be the most adaptable. Right. You can get a fair bit of meat in there. Yes. You go back to a 20 centimetre, which is what I've got. There's a lot of things that are too big for it. So jumping up that size, I think, is better. And then you take it out and you replant, and by the time you get through your rows, you're back again. And so you've got a continual function with those. And you can throw more. If you've got other material, you can always put it with it, with those chickens. Yeah, they're just starting to at that stage, but depending how fast you're getting through them, you can moderate that, or you can have other things there that you don't take that are in the same space.
How big is that wattle when you're chipping it?
In a couple of years, something like Acacia decurrens, black wattle, or Mianzi green wattle, will get it about that, at waist height.
Right.
So it'll fit the chipper sort of thing, so you can cut fairly readily and straight in. It's not so woody. They haven't started falling to bits on you.
Yeah.
It's still got a fair bit of leaf on it, which is that what they call ramial wood chip. Is got a good balance of carbon to nitrogen and juicy stuff to harder stuff.
Something around this topic, with trees and growing for compost, for mulch compost. in agroforestry system, we try to not transport too much around the farm. So we can easily have a eucalypt or a wattle or any type of tree that fits in the orchard, and you just chop it and leave it where it is. And we found that actually to be very effective at improving the soil without even needing to turn on a diesel motor. You use electric chainsaw too.
Well, there is one that comes to mind in the macadamia industry, which has a history of creating a D- result for the river system, and problematic for growers with soil health problems and pest problems. One of the growers has been through that cycle, and there's been a lot of stuff happening on the periphery that hasn't really made any difference, but he's able to pull the pin on every second row, turn them into compost, take them away, turn them into compost, and then direct drill cover crops into that area. And even though he's lost a third of his trees, so far he's had a 30% increase in production, and the bug spotters are finding less pests on his farm. And because it's quite a big farm, it's very respectable. So if you do it on a little scale, you know, oh yeah, well, you know, it's just a little guy, he can do what he likes. But a lot of people will look to a big grower and say, well, if they're doing it, we might do it. So so continually monitoring the results. He's only been into it 3 or 4 years, and the improvements are just continuous. He's certainly getting pluses all around, and is able to maintain underneath the trees very readily, so it's not interfering with that. There's enough light, so you get more beneficial insects in there, and you've got all the flowers. Deep and penetrating root system on some of the species, so they're improving the soil. It's, you know, and it's paid for itself, and there's more benefits to come. So you know, it's one of those things where the industry's never had a model of where to go. It's normally you get to a certain point, then you sell the farm because it's too expensive to do anything else. And so now the farmers have actually come up with a model, and the industry and DPI will hopefully take. Almonds certainly need it. Yeah, yeah. They're another industrial crop these days. So yeah, so we really need to, and again we're looking at transferring information from one place to another. So that revolution in multi-species cover cropping has mainly come from grains, and here we go, it comes into perennial production horticulture now. And so the same methodology giving good results. The compost provided for on farm, they're actually doing quite a few biostimulants there as well. So you can actually end up, what I'd like to see is actually that model being validated and then adopted. If you're a macadamia farmer, this is something you can follow, and instead of getting to a point where you get to a point and you throw up your arms, what can we do? You've actually got something planned all the way along and you're ready for it.
But as part of this project, we need to go back to the ET, the Environmental Trust, and say, we've educated people, but also what they really want to see is what's changed as part of their education. You want to see some sort of on-ground results as part of this, and that helps out the community more. So a big part of this is trying to getting a few landholders from every workshop that we do to say, right, as part of this, as part of the lessons I've learned, I'm going to change what I've done in one way. It could be one different practice, and if we can just, you know, have a chat about that, as simple as that, and we can sort of get a bit of that story and feed that into our data about, okay, we've measured an actual change as a result of the project, then that's a great thing. And